Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's episode is going to be part 2 of the Twin Carb series, and it's mostly on teardown inspection and cleaning, verifying what parts are wrong, what parts are right, etc. So I want to start out by saying that this car took 8 days to get tuned. These carbs took 8 days to get tuned. Now, the reason it took 8 days is because I was told that some of these parts had already been replaced or rebuilt, and I went off those assumptions. Now, it would have been faster for me to have simply taken these cars totally apart and done a complete and thorough rebuild as if they had never been rebuilt before. But since I went with some of the assumptions that I was told, I am wasting a bunch of time and energy trying to tune this car, only to find out that things that were supposed to be right were actually not right. So during the disassembly, cleaning, and whatnot, I discussed many of the aspects of these carbs and why they're wrong. And I find actually the number of surprises I run into with these dashpot tops. So I'll talk about that later on in the episode. But I want to point out that if you have a pair of twin carbs, the key to making them work properly is they must operate as if they are a singular carburetor. And I'm talking about every tiny detail. Because if you don't get the details right, you won't get the synchronization of the movement of the pistons, you won't get the discs opening and closing right, you won't get the choke operation right. Even the float levels have to be identical in order for them to work properly. So if you want your twin carbs to work right, you got to make them work as if they're a singular unit. So with that having been said, let's dig into the episode and follow along on my disassembly process on those carbs. Here are the carbs. I took them off the engine as a complete assembly because I wanted to work on them together. I noticed there's a lot of rust in these float bowls, so I'm going to have to put a filter on the fuel line because it's dragging rust out of the tank. This is that front carburetor. This is the one with that jet problem I was mentioning earlier. So if you activate the choke, you'll notice that this one's hanging up, and so is this one. But if this one gets relieved, they both snap in place. So once again, when you pulled the choke out, this jet was just getting stuck. So I need to fix that so the jets return to the proper place so I can do the tuning properly. Also, I've noticed, and this is a minor issue here, but this carburetor has lost its screw, choke adjustment screw, fast idle screw. So it's on this side, but it's missing on this side, so I'll have to find a screw for this one. It's also missing the center throttle return spring. There was a spring attached to the air filter housing, but I'm going to go and refit the correct one down here when the time comes. So while I've got this off, what I'm going to do is, I believe that these have probably been rebuilt somewhat recently because it does have the nitro fill floats. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick check to make sure these are set at the correct height. And then I'm going to pull the carbs off of the manifold so I can fit a new set of gaskets on here because I noticed there were air leaks along this region on both sides. So new gaskets, and then I'll worry about synchronizing them once I get them on the bench. So for synchronizing, I'm going to be checking the tops, the drop rates on the tops, the rising and falling on both carburetors to make sure they're equal. And if I have to, I'll make adjustments to the dampers themselves. So that'll be something I need to check. Also, I'm curious to see what the jet positions are and see if they're anywhere close to being correct. Now, on this front carburetor, I am going to do the jet centralization procedure to see if I can stop this jet from sticking, because I'm wondering if that may be the reason why this jet is sticking, is that perhaps this is not centralized properly. So I'll be doing a little extra work to this front one to make sure these jets, we want them to retract naturally. So I've noticed another issue. This is the front carburetor, and the back carburetor has the same problem. If I lift the piston up and let it drop, you see how it's slowed down right at the bottom? I think what's happened is that this jet is definitely not centralized on the needle. So if I open up the chokes and do it again, it just drops straight down against its stop just fine. But when the choke is disengaged, it slows down. So there's definitely some friction going on, which just means that I need to recentralize these jets. Carburetor with the jet that's sticking has the exact same problem. In fact, you can see that I pushed up the piston and it's still just stuck up here. So this one's yeah, this one's definitely not even close to being centralized. So that's what's going on with this rear carburetor. So let's take it to the bench and get it fixed. So I've given the carbs a bit of a clean in my ultrasonic tank just to get all the grit and grime off of them. It looks like it has been, at least someone tried to rebuild it. It has a nitrofill float and the correct needle jet in here. This jet looks new. The fit between the damper and the top is good. Didn't have any issues with that. This, I believe, is going to be the wrong spring. I think this is a red spring. These carbs would have used blue springs. The damper top, not sure why someone's decided to stick a green O-ring on here, but that's going away. Now, on the choke operation on this carb, this is the front one. It's actually quite stiff. I know I need to re-lubricate everything after going through the cleaning process, but yeah, I need to take this linkage off and have a look and find out why this is such a stiff process, because this should move pretty freely even before you lubricate it. So gonna have a quick look in there, but otherwise yeah, everything's nice and clean now, so I can begin. Oh, one more problem. The disc was not centralized, so let me show you some. I'll shine this on the light and you can see, but basically there's a bunch of light leaking out of the bottom of this disc, so whoever put this together didn't centralize the disc properly. Also, they did not tighten up the little bendy thread bits on these special screws for this butterfly, so they just put the screws in and then left it alone. These would have rattled loose, eventually made their way into the engine and potentially damaged a valve, so it's a good thing I decided to take this carb off and have a look. So I'll re-centralize the jet and then bend those tabs back, and that'll be good on that. Now, the throttle shafts actually do feel quite nice. Yeah, the shafts, I guess the bushings must have been done on these carbs because they do feel quite nice. But we'll see how they test on that car under actual running conditions. So there you can see the light bleeding through the butterfly. So that's what I mean by these are not being centralized properly. So I've just re-centralized the butterfly and bent out the little wings on the locking screws. So I'll now show you the light leakage that is present with a properly centralized disc. There. You can now see very, very small amount of light leaking past this butterfly. So I've just finished taking this linkage apart. I cleaned it and lubricated it, and now it's back to its snappy choke operation. So I think it was just gritty and dirty, because it seems okay now. So now we're having a look at the float, and this is the later Darrens stay up type, but it still uses the metal bendy arm to make adjustments, and the book specifies for these to be between 0.125 and 0.187 of a gap. So if I check with a 0.125, you can see it easily clears. Using the 0.187, same thing. So there's just too much float lid space between the float and the lid. So I'm going to go ahead and set it down and adjust it correctly. I'll probably go to 0.187, and we'll see what the other carburetor looks like, because obviously I've only done one, so I need to make sure they match. So whatever setting I use on here, I need to make sure I use on the other one. So now that I've finished up with the float bowl and the float lid, we need to check that the bearing surface for the damper here is essentially aligned with the jet here. So I was having issues with the chokes returning. That's usually an indication of some sort of jet issue. So this is the special tool for centralizing the jets. What you do is you fit it into the top, and then you get the little tube in here to centralize on this. You have to loosen this nut. And once you can fit this tube all the way down to the base, then you know that it's centralized. And right now, I can't actually get the tool all the way down because it runs into the jet and it can't pass through because it's not centralized properly. So I'll get this nut loose, and then I'll get the tool centered all the way, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So I have the tool fitted now, and you can see that I can press the tool all the way down to the shoulder. You loosen this up, you spin the brass piece around until it's the smoothest operation of the tool that you can get, and then you know that your jet is centralized along this this axis of the tool here. So now that we've done that, We've got a very nice, smooth, and snappy choke operation, and even if you pull it out just a little bit, it automatically returns back all the way. Also, I've run the nut all the way up, so this is full range of motion up to the bridge on the jet. So I'm sure I'll be able to lean this thing all the way out if I need to. That's another reason why you go through this trouble, because sometimes you find that the jets get jammed on the way up, and part of it's because of the centralization problem. So this carb is good to go. I'm going to fit a blue spring to the top and bring the needle back in, and then I'm going to look at the other carburetor and see what was wrong with that one. So new blue spring on the left, and this is probably a standard red spring on the right. So the blue spring is what you want to fit on twin carb applications. So with carb number one complete, we're moving on to the rear carburetor. This is the one with the really sticky jet, and I checked the disc. The disc is centralized properly. However, the screws were also not split open, so problem number one. It's got the same float setting, so I need to adjust that one down to the setting I set to the first one. And this one was the one that was missing the idle air adjustment screw, so I got to find a screw for that one. But yeah, this one's just got a really sticky jet assembly, so I'm going to take it out and do the exact same thing that I did to the first one. But otherwise, this is in decent shape. Like I said, I do believe that these throttle shaft bushes were done somewhat recently, and they do feel quite nice. So at least there's that for that pair. And yeah, so let me just get this linkage apart and find out what happened to it. So carb number one is back into working function again. Went through the jet centralization process, got the jet all working nice and smoothly. Replaced the missing screw on here, so this is all good now. I've gone ahead and pre-adjusted the jets to be equal, so that when I go to start it up, I'll have equal jet heights. One thing I did notice while I was checking out and cleaning the remaining components is that the throttle assembly here, you'll notice that one screw has got the nut pointed up and one has got it pointed down. Well, it's because someone has fitted two right-hand side linkage pieces. So this one should have the opposite configuration. The flat section should be down here and the straight section should be up here. So I need to go find another linkage piece, because the other problem that this side has is that the nut and the bolt is stripped. So I'm going to actually double nutted this one to keep it in place. So rather than just finding a bolt, I'm just going to go find a whole nother assembly. I have several components in my used parts bin. Another problem is that this carb tag here, the anchor hanger for the spring, was missing on this linkage piece, so I just found a new or a good used spring anchor for this this part. And one other thing I found, so I refitted all the components back to the tops, and I was going to reuse these needles, but they have tool marks right at the shoulder. It's probably really hard to see, but there are some severe scratches and score marks right here at the top edge. So this needle in particular has the most damage to the top face. Also, this piston cushion is totally destroyed, so that'll need replacing at some point in the future as well. The other top has a good piston cushion. It's got about the correct dimension, and this needle is okay, apart from the fact that there are some fairly long scratches, meaning the needle has been running against the jet tube on the front carb there. So I'm just going to replace both these needles with a pair of brand new M needles, since I know that's to be a pretty good profile. Now this one here is an AN, very similar but has less acceleration fueling. And since I'm planning on changing the air filters, I'm probably going to need more fuel anyway at the top end. So I'll go ahead and change these needles out. Now the next steps would be to match the drop rates on both of these tops. So I need to take care of that. I've already cleaned up the aluminum spacer that's in here. I've cleaned up the flanges, I've cleaned up the faces, I've cleaned up the threads. I'm also cleaned up this mounting flange. So manifold's finished, carb bodies are finished. I need to fix the linkage and the needles, but other than that, I'm getting really close to getting this back onto the car. So looking forward to getting to tuning, knowing that these are going to be working as a pair. And that's really the key, is making sure that these things operate as a pair. So whatever you do, make sure that it operates identically. So when I talk about setting the height of the jet, I used a dial indicator to measure the depth of each one of these. I made sure that they were equal, so I know that they're starting from an equal starting point. So the important part of twin carbs is paying attention to the details. Every little detail matters, and you've got to get them right, otherwise they won't work as a pair. So I think it's ready to go back together. Word of warning, you're going to need 6 of these gaskets and 2 of these for the air filter housings to do this job properly. Now, when I assemble this, I want to make sure I put a little grease on the linkage, the ends of the linkage in particular, but I'll show you guys that when I get to that point. But either way, take your time. It's a bit fiddly because you got to fit the linkage to the carburetor bodies and then slide them onto the studs as one assembly because you can't fit them in after the fact. So just be gentle and work those onto the manifold carefully. But I'm going to go ahead and assemble this, and then I'll show you guys how I adjust everything. So one of the last projects that you have to do on a pair of twin carbs is to calibrate the tops and the dampers. So when I say calibrate, I mean the rate at which these pistons rise and fall is critical to make them operate as if they were a single carburetor. So you'll notice the one on the left here moves much faster than the one on the right. So that means that I need to make this one speed up a little bit to match this one. And then also I need to put some oil in here and check for their drop rate as well, because if we do this, you'll see how much faster this one on the left is compared to the one on the right. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll show you the results. So I've gone ahead and blocked off all the air holes just to make sure that this is a fair test. And if we watch them together side by side, the left one still drops way faster than the one on the right. So got my work to do on that. But you can see I just use a little bit of hot glue to block off the hole there. Well, that was actually easier than I thought. So one thing I always like to check is if the tops and the pistons were by chance switched by someone accidentally. So I haven't actually modified these yet, but I switched the inner parts. So now if I do the drop test, they're almost identical. So this is why you need to check your parts and make sure that they're operating properly, because clearly just by changing the position of those inner pistons, we almost have identical drop rates. So this one's still moving a little bit slower than this one, so I'll go ahead and make a minor adjustment to this one. But yeah, I'm really pleased that just switching those inner pieces was able to get me to a better drop rate than I had before. So let's talk about the throttle linkage now that the carbs are fitted to the manifold. So on this linkage assembly, first of all, both the rods need to have some amount of free play. You don't want them to be bound up against the throttle shafts because of thermal expansion can cause issues and they might stick. So you always want to make sure you have a bit of free play in both of these rods. Now, what I like to do is I like to tighten one of these clamps, and usually I try and set the throttle so that the stop is right up against the choke arm here. So, you know, I move the rod until it's touching here, and then what I'll do is I will tighten one of these arms so that it's tight, and this one is already tightened, so that when I pull on the throttle and I'm just touching this arm here on the throttle, I can then come in and tighten this one. So while I'm holding on to the stop with my left hand, I can then push on this one on the right and then tighten up the nut. So sometimes I have to use, you know, my entire left hand to do this, but I'm basically giving light pressure on the left hand against the throttle stops, and I'm going to tighten up this nut. So now, when I move this, I can see that both these throttle arms are touching their butterflies and are moving both the throttles at the exact same time. And I know that there's a bit of free play here. So if I need to increase or decrease the idle speed, I can. So now that I got the throttle adjusted so that it opens the butterflies, you'll notice there's a bit of play, and these are slotted. So what will happen is when I set the throttle cable in here, I will try and adjust this to be maybe somewhere in the middle of this range until I've got the idle screws fully adjusted for the idle speed that I need, and of course synchronizing. But for now, I'll just shoot for somewhere in the middle of that amount of free play. And right now I've got the idle screws set for a couple turns in, so the car should start right up, and I should just be able to adjust these idle screws without the throttle cable hanging up or causing issues with the butterflies. Now, the same thing applies with the choke up here. So I've got both these jets, again, adjusted to the exact same height. So I want to set this arm so that both the stops are being touched by the levers. So, there is a little bit of free play in here. And as long as the rod can move back and forth, I'm happy. But these ones, you just basically just push down, tighten up the nuts, and you're good to go. Now, when the car is running, you'll need to come in here and set your fast speed idle screws. So you might actually need to loosen these up and readjust them once it's running. But again, initial settings, just make everything equal and deal with it once it's running on the car. One thing I do want to verify is that when I'm operating the choke, I'll know that these are both moving equally if I've got the fast speed screws adjusted properly. So if I just pull on the choke lever, we should see both of these butterflies down here moving in sequence. And right there is when there's a cam profile. So right there is when they touch the heads of the screws, and then they both open together at the exact same time. So at least I know initially for my cold start, everything is adjusted equal. Fast screws equal, throttle screws equal, butterflies are going to open equally. So that's it for basic settings. Like I said, set your jet heights to be equal. I got them about 50 thousandths down from the bridge, and that should be enough to get it to start. So at this point, this is basically ready to take back to the car. So I'm going to take it to the car and reinstall it on the head. So before I go out and put the carbs on the car and do a first start on it, I just want to reiterate the work I had done to these carbs up to this point was based on the information I was provided by the owner. So again, the owner had told me that the jets were fairly new and the bushes had been done. And he had told me that, I could see that they had been machined, and I saw the jets were fairly fresh looking. So I went on that assumption and did not do anything to them during this little clean and repair project on these carbs. Now, the rest of the work was essentially just getting them to work properly again. The jet work, the adjustment work on the linkage, the missing hardware, etc. All fairly common problems. So if you've got a twin carb set, I'm sure these are common issues to your car because I see them all the time, which is why I know what to do to get these to work properly. Now, in the next episode, you're going to see me getting this car up and running. You'll see it running kind of oddly. And so once I start seeing some strange behavior, I know that there's other problems with these carburetors, and I do have to take them off again to do some more rebuilding work. So that's what I was saying in the beginning of this episode, that it would have been easier for me to get this car tuned if I just started with basically doing a total rebuild on these carburetors to begin with. But since I was going off the information I was provided that they were actually rebuilt, I ended up having to waste more time trying to do this tuning work because ultimately the carbs don't respond as they should once I get them on the car. But stay tuned for that episode, and I'll talk about all the things that I see once I get into that episode. So hopefully this video was helpful for you. And if it was, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.